rolling in a major way. Nice clothes, nice car. Nice clothes, nice car.
All right, so this is episode 2 of 100% Trustworthy Financial Advice. Not financial advice. Today we're going to be talking about living situations after college or any new living situation. For the majority of people listening, I'm going to assume that you're going to be renting because I think all young people have this doom and gloom fear that they're never going to actually buy a house. I think millennials, not just Gen Z, had that same exact fear when they were coming out of college and when they were in their 20s and their early 30s. Like currently, 74% of Gen Z is renting, and that number was similar for millennials as well. But now, a majority of millennials own their home. I think in mid-2023, 52% of millennials own their home. So that's a good sign. That means, in general, it's progressing. Just the older you get, it sucks. I mean, for people our age, that it's going to be an older time frame, just like it was for millennials in their mid-30s, late 30s, when they were able to buy a house, unlike previous generations where they bought houses earlier. But Gen Z, don't be too afraid that you're never going to be able to buy a house. But for now, we're going to be doing a lot of renting. Renting is not a bad situation to be in at all. Some people will tell you that renting is throwing money away. These are usually old people, old, crotchety, out-of-touch people. They wear khaki shorts and white socks. Usually have some weird smell. They're not really aware of their smell either. They just kind of subject people. But you know who I'm talking about. They're out of touch. They're like, oh, you're renting? You're throwing money away? They're just detached from reality. And there are some major upsides to renting a property. Ideally, your landlord actually maintains the property, and that's something that you don't have to worry about. If the roof is leaking, you don't have to worry about your contractors. You don't have to worry about any of that. The landlord will take care of all of that, ideally. And if he doesn't, you haggle, you be an asshole, you file every complaint you do, you threaten my lawyer is so rich and successful, you've never seen anything like my lawyer. He owns horses. You know, you just say shit like that, and you hope that your landlord's like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually had to get my roof fixed for my tenant. But listen, in all honesty, the first place you move to is probably going to be dog shit. I mean, just don't have the highest expectations for the first place you move into on your own. Post-college, I mean, you live in college apartments, you live in college housing and off-campus, things like that. You run into some pretty grisly things, I'm sure. But you're still kind of in a protected kind of area if you think about it. They're renting to students. They need to have a constant stream of students. But when you venture out into the real world, your landlord really could care less if you were shot dead in your apartment. So you really just have to be on the lookout for yourself. And also understand that you have to have some pretty low expectations when it comes to your first. All right, so your first apartment is not going to be a world beater. Don't expect to be throwing grand parties and all that Gatsby nonsense. What you want to look for in your first apartment is that it holds heat in the winter, and in the summer you have some sort of access to fresh air. If it has those two things and there isn't mold, you're pretty much good to move in. I mean, that's all you really need. Those are kind of the basics. Running water, that's a luxury a lot of times in your first apartment. Get used to drinking a lot of bottled water. But something that you definitely want to be on the lookout for when you first move into a place is the fire safety amenities. Because, and this might sound crazy, but I'm not too keen on dying in a fire anytime soon. So I do have an interest in having working sprinkler systems, a fire escape. Fire extinguisher is a big thing. The first place I moved into had a fire extinguisher that expired 3 years before that. And I'm on the 5th floor, and there's no fire escape. The only way out is through the front door. So there was a high likelihood that I would have died in a fire in a place like that. So make sure that the safety aspects are covered. Be on the lookout for chipping, lead paint. I mean, listen, honest to God, hey, lead paint, come on. A couple years off your life at the end of it all. I mean, for some cheap rent, lead paint, we can live with lead paint. Don't actually do that. But really be on the lookout for mold. Mold is the worst thing ever. I had a couple friends who lived in a mold-infested place, and they were always just like, yeah, man, I don't know, man, I'm just always sick. I'm like, yeah, you look like shit. You're gaunt. Your skin is red. You look like you've been exposed to radiation, and you're coughing, you're hacking up a lung. And they were good. They're good people. They weren't vaping. or anything like that. They were just constant respiratory hell. And it's just because they had mold coating the entire inside of their closet. So yeah, be on the lookout for mold. Mold just destroys your quality of life, and it will like legitimately fuck up how you live day to day. When you're renting, you need to be aware of the situation you're walking into. All right, know who you are renting from. There's like two people you're going to be renting from. One is a person, an individual, someone who personally owns the property, and then another is like a corporate situation where you're dealing with a company. When you're dealing with an individual, that's kind of what I would prefer. I mean, it can kind of go. Sometimes I would prefer working with like an individual landlord because there are some benefits. You can negotiate with them a little more. They're more likely to change aspects of the rent. Just because you can reason with them on a personal level, you're not going to get anyone important in a room when you're working with a corporate owner. And there's things that you can do with a personal owner, like you can offer value for money off rent. This means like you can offer to paint. Like let's say it's beat to shit, all the walls are fading brown, things are peeling, there's wallpaper. You can offer to rip that off, put up just plain white paint, and see if you can get money off of your rent for labor. But always make sure you get everything that you do in writing, no matter what. Because landlords, they like to be tricky. You know, they like to blame you for... And this is the thing, man. I think that this is an important thing to think about. When you move into your first place, you should be on the lookout for whether or not it's haunted. Because the first place that I lived at, I think we had ghosts that were pouring bacon grease down the kitchen sink and oatmeal in the powder room bathroom. So it really fucked up our plumbing pretty bad. These ghosts that we had that kept pouring bacon grease in the kitchen sink. Just make sure you're on the lookout for like whether or not the apartment is haunted. Just take care of the place that you're living in. Don't beat up someone else's house, or apartment. I know that it kind of, you're like, everyone has this perception of landlords that they're these evil, meisters. But, I mean, in all honesty, most of the time there's just people that happen to have another property. They happen to have made that amount of success in their life. They are probably a failure in some other aspect. I mean, everyone is a failure in some way. So you got to cut people some slack. When it comes to dealing with a corporate landlord, there are 3 things that you have to do. Pay on time, don't get complained about, keep it clean. You are not going to add any value to the property. They are not interested in that. Don't paint the walls. Don't put up curtains. Don't nail it. Don't touch the fucking walls. You put a single hole in those fucking walls, goodbye to your security. You can call the sweet lady that works at the front office who sells leases. That's basically what her job is. And you say, can I nail this picture of my grandmother to the wall? She's like, oh, of course you can. And that costs you $1,700 because they're going to say you put a hole in the wall and your security deposit is gone. Don't touch the walls. Don't punch any holes in the walls because you're losing money gambling. As tempting as that is, break the doors. Doors are replaceable. Anyone can reinstall a door. If you're going to punch a hole in something, kick a hole in something, target the doors. A lot easier to fix. But generally, just keep your head down if you're renting from a corporate place. Don't fuck with your neighbors. Don't be an asshole. If their dog barks, get fucking louder headphones. Do not start a fight with your neighbor over a barking dog or loud music. Smoke a little weed and vibe with the music they're playing. Or better yet, actually, never mind. I was going to say play music louder than them, but that, like I said, that's going to draw attention. You don't want to do that. Live like a ghost and move on when you're done with the fucking place. Wring out every piece of value you can. Don't add anything to it. Don't cause any trouble. Keep your head down. Move on. That's what they're there for. Corporate leases, all that. They're there to exist in and then just move on from. Don't make a fucking home out of it. Also, don't move into a building for amenities that you will never lose. The building gym is probably full of creeps and goblins, like literal the hell spawn, just the worst things. Things you've never seen in your life are in apartment complex gyms. Things that you didn't know were possible are rooting around in there, rummaging. Not when the lady shows you the building. She's gotten him out of there. She's lured him away with a Snickers bar or a free vending machine pass. But when you're there for real to work out, he's standing in the corner staring at you like he's going to steal your soul. And the clubhouse that they pitched to you in the apartment building is a fucking room with a microwave and fridge. All right, you're never going to host a party there. You'll never go in there. And you're pretty sure it's a crime scene investigation. If a building is, $300 more a month because, it has nice amenities, you'll never fucking use those amenities. It's not worth the money. Spend the money on... Save the money. Do that. But in all seriousness, corporate rentals can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they are very, very consistent, easy to predict. On the other hand, they have policies that are probably like arbitrary and stupid. Like you can't wear flip-flops or something like that in the elevator. Just some fucking insurance regulatory thing that just numbs your mind. But then you get fined $500 at the end of the month for breaking the rule. But while we're on the topics of rules, let's talk about leases for a little bit. There are a couple things that you should look out for on leases. The first thing is who's responsible for the maintenance of the property. Some leases will state that the renter is responsible, and others may say that the landlord is. Ultimately, and this is really state by state, but most states have come to a consensus on this, that the landlord is responsible for any maintenance due to wear or natural occurrence, and that the renter is responsible for any damage that they themselves cause. And that's called implied warranty of habitability. That's what the set of laws is called. And each state is a little different, but they pretty much all guarantee the same idea, that renters pay for damages that they cause and landlords take care of the rest. Another thing that you want to make sure is fully captured in the lease is the terms of move-in fees and the security deposit. Some landlords will try to make a deal with you outside the lease to lower some fees. But if this is not reflected on the lease, the landlord may be trying to trick you, like negotiating lower fees to get you to move into the property. And then once you've moved in, you've signed the lease that actually has the higher fees. And they say, okay, you actually owe me those other fees. You say, but you negotiated lower fees. But you're like, but it's on the lease that you actually owe these fees. You want to be on the lookout for that. If he's talking about negotiating fees, always make sure it's reflected in the lease. And security deposits. This varies state to state, but most states have laws on the minimums and maximums that can be charged for security deposits. Some states also have laws that determine how the security deposit money is to be held. Like it's usually in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm located at, it has to be held in an escrow account if it's over, I think, $500. So if your landlord is asking for security deposit in cash, he is most likely not actually using that for security deposit. Something to be on the lookout for. Another general scam to be on the lookout for, especially if you're living in cities, and this is for listeners who might be looking at lower income rental properties. If a landlord is having you pay half in check and half in cash, or some odd split up where you're paying only some portion in check and some portion in cash, he might be taking advantage of government programs that offer things like tax refunds or just general government assistance to landlords who rent for affordable housing units. And so he might be collecting a much higher amount for rent, but only reporting a certain amount and taking advantage of that loophole. If you're moving into cities on the East Coast, it's something to be on the lookout for, especially in areas like New York, Philadelphia, particularly Brooklyn in New York. All right, and when it comes to moving into your first place, the last thing I want to talk about is where are you going to live? And I don't mean this in the sense of like, oh, you should be living on the East Coast or you have to move to Silicon Valley or anything like that. There are so many opportunities in America that you can find success really anywhere. And that, might not be true in some extreme cases. I know that there are barrenest places like Appalachia. So just don't move there. Move to places that have populations above 50,000. Try to keep it to that. That's the bare minimum if you're thinking about moving. If you're not going to move, just stay where you're at. But what I mean where you live, I mean commute. All right? The majority of people have to commute to work around 20 to 30 minutes. Unless you're in like New Jersey and DC, it's a nightmare. It's like 40 minutes. All right. And a lot of people make a big deal about being close to work to the point where they overpay massively for living conveniently in a convenient proximity to work. Short commutes are nice, but it's hard to justify spending hundreds or maybe even thousands of dollars more. If you get a job in a different area, go to that job, hop on the closest highway, and drive as many exits out before you feel like you want to drive into the median, into the dividers. And when you get to that area, then reel it back maybe 2 or 3 exits and say, okay, could I make this drive every morning? And if you're comfortable with making that drive, start looking for properties around there. Like I said in my last episode, America is built around the car. And we actually have a pretty effective system of PA. PA has a pretty good turnpike system. I know in some instances around the major cities it can be a disaster. But in general, if you're getting around the state, the turnpike is very effective. The United States as a whole has a massive interstate system, and state to state, our turnpike systems are usually pretty well fleshed out. Take advantage of that. It's what the country is set up to do. So what I really want to say in the end, when it comes to renting, just know your rights as a renter, primarily. Don't fuck with the property. Don't do anything crazy. Unless your landlord starts acting crazy, then pour fucking bacon grease down his sink. But don't actually do that. Just know your rights as a renter. Be careful with what you're doing. Be conscientious of who you're renting from. And don't make too big of a deal out of the proximity of where you're living and where you're working. You can make it work. You can save a lot of money. And it can be a headache, but just get into music. Just listen to music. Or you can listen to pop. Don't listen to this while driving. You will drive into oncoming traffic. This will not help you in that situation. But get into something that makes driving enjoyable. I, for one, love driving. I love speeding. I love egging on the police when I drive. I love revving my engine as I pull up next to police officers at stoplights. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's always good to do that. Don't actually do that. And just make driving a game. That's one thing you can do. All I'm saying is don't waste money for 15 extra minutes on your commute. It's a stupid thing to spend $750 a month more on, is 15 minutes a day. And if you really don't want to deal with renting, live with your parents. If your parents are cool with it, be a leech. Now, don't actually be a leech. If you live with your parents, and this is something I might kind of recommend if you just want to save money for a year, don't make a habit out of living with your parents. It's important to have ambition and things like that. And living with your parents might make you too comfortable, might kill your ambition. Want to be careful about stuff like that. But if you do live with your parents, improve their quality of life. Do the things that I was talking about before with the landlord, but do it for free. Paint your mom's room, put in new toilets, clean, make dinner every once in a while. If you're going to live at home to save money, improve the quality of life of the people around you. You know, if you have younger siblings at the house, maybe pick them up from school or whatever. If you have the time to take them to practice, help your parents out in a way that they have been helping you out for years. If you're going to live at home, which honestly I might recommend if you're trying to save money and you don't want the headache of dealing with a crazy landlord or living in a community that hasn't had any soul in it ever. Anyway, that's all the time I'm going to take up. I was kind of ranting a little bit. Think I encouraged crime again. Can't stop myself from doing that. All right, have a nice one.
This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.